Now, this topic that we're digging into, I feel is very timely, right? Like the environment is constantly shifting. We're working in new environments, whether that's in new economic pressures or political scenarios or just new generations entering the workforce. It's hard to really understand what are the true motivators of our people. Like, what is at the core of keeping them engaged, keeping them fired up at working at your organization to make an impact and motivated to be part of your culture and your team. So we're going to unpack some of these things, but I'd love next in chat. Let's kind of get the gears turning, get us warmed up a little bit. This is from the actual State of Motivation report that our partners Attuned today has released. These 11 motivators that we found to be core essential pillars to what motivates our people. Now we're going to unpack at what's at the top of the list, but for you, what is your biggest motivator? I'd be curious. Like, I want to hear from all of you in our network. What are some of your biggest motivators? What gets you fired up? Is it the sense of purpose and impact? Is it the progress that you're seeing on the work that you're doing? Is it the ability to innovate and try new things? Like, what is it for you that gets you motivated? Like, what's at the core for you as an individual, as a professional? Is it the financial needs? Like, hey, I'm just here to make some money. Like, I'm incentivized and motivated by money. Like, I get it. That's cool. Like, what is it for you? What are some of the other things? Yeah, maybe even your top three if you want to keep take it even further. Jessica, it's the impact, rationality, altruism, social relationships. That's big for me, Lauren, for sure. I mean, I'm a community guy. I'm all about social relationships, purpose, innovation. Chris, yeah, altruism and social relationships, altruism, progress, sense of purpose. Okay, trust and guidance, Mohammed. Wendy, we got a bunch of them, right? Altruism, security, social relationships, competition. Okay, Nina, that's a good one. I'm excited to actually dig into that. Like, what does competition actually mean? And is there a good and toxic competition we should be thinking about here? Connections. All right, this is awesome. Keep putting in the chat what that is. A lot of altruism. I love to see that. Christo, financial needs, security. I think that's very relevant given the current state of the world and our environment that we're living and working in. All right, let's get to the fun stuff. Let's start to unpack this. As I said, if you have any questions or things you want to dig into with these motivators, let us know. Rachel, autonomy. All right. Yeah. Workplace trauma response, probably. Okay. Um, so that's what we're here to do. Let's unpack this. This is all about the future of motivation, the current state of it. What are the trends that are really redefining our engagement strategies? Like, what's at the core of these strategies that can keep our people engaged, performing, and retained with our organization? Because if we're coming in with certain engagement strategies that reflect innovation, but it's not at the top of what motivates our people, we got to change our strategy here. So let's start to unpack that. I'm excited to be joined by three amazing leaders. If we could give them a warm welcome to the virtual stage with me. We have Christopher Littlefield, which is a founder, international speaker on employee appreciation. Chris, welcome. We have Kristin
Excited to be
Henderson,
here.
Global Learning and Development Manager for Burberry. Welcome, Kristin. And last but not least, Casey Wahl, founder and CEO at Attuned. Casey, welcome. All right. I'm going to stop sharing here. It's great to see all your lovely faces. I'm excited to unpack this with you all, especially because, you're in the weeds with this. You're in the field on this topic, working with organizations. So I would love to maybe just unpack the report and the motivations a little bit at a high level to start. If you don't mind, Casey, talking a little bit about the report, some of the new findings for 2025 in the future. And then I would love to start unpacking these things. Like, what does that mean for our engagement strategy? And what are strategies we do to actually enable that? So, yeah, Casey, can you tell us a little bit about this report and some of the things you're starting to find?
Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks for that intro. So I'm Casey. I'm the CEO and the founder here of Attune.ai. And maybe I should just give a brief overview of what we do at Attune. So we're software. It's a tool really made for managers to try to help give managers like an extra superpower to understand the motivations of all the individuals on their team. So it can visualize that. It can have the gaps of it. So It's a great tool for like new managers or managers going into kind of a new role, or if you got some issues going on the team, you can't understand people. So it really helps you understand yourself. So what Attuned is really good at is that one-to-one relationship, so that manager to that team member relationship. But what we found doing this over a while is we've got tens of thousands of people taking this all over the world over each year. So we're getting to see big data as well. So it's not only the little data. So we've started to share this state of motivation report over the last couple of years, and I should give a shout out to the team. Like, I didn't do all the difficult work of crunching the numbers. I didn't make these beautiful infographics that you can all steal and please use in your presentations. But I think what we're seeing in this 2025 report is kind of a return to more like stability, like back to the revision to the norm is, or reversion to the norm is kind of what we're seeing. So financial needs is back at the top across, and I think it's what, 51%, 52% is the average score of people needing to have that for their motivation. And that's been actually the top motivator for 5 out of the last 6 years. So it was down last year, came back. Status is there, very kind of high. What we saw with this group is altruism is quite highly represented. And I think this is the really interesting part. So, if we're here in this group, okay, hey, altruism, that's probably the world around me is motivated by altruism. But actually, as we're starting to look in the big data, you can start to see, okay, what are the trends? And we didn't see tremendous amount of movement this year, but there were some interesting things like social relationships started to drop, like after going up and up with a pandemic year. So I think the pandemic is kind of behind us. We've got this little bit of stability in terms of what it is across the big data. But as you kind of get into the details, what I'm really interested in, I think some of the real kind of insights are the generational gap data. So between the baby boomers or the millennials or the Gen Z, and what you see in there is quite interesting. So Christopher, I don't know if you had any thoughts so far from what you've seen from the data and what you're experiencing as well.
Yeah, I think, just to kind of jump in, I think that this idea, this notion of return to normal, like, is that even possible? Is that even what we want? Right? Because the reality is we are not necessarily living in a world that looked like it did before COVID. So we have economical, societal, behavioral, technological, organizational changes. This makes our reality different. So let's acknowledge it and then let's see how we can use it to move forward. So that's my first thought for sure.
And I think that's really interesting. Like, the world around us is constantly changing. It's only going to keep getting faster and faster. And, as leaders and as practitioners, it's like, okay, what's happening inside of people as well? Like, their motivations and their values are shifting. And usually we're not able to see this. So, you've got shifting on the outside world, shifting on the inside world. And now how can we bring this together as well? So I think with that stability, you know, it says, okay, this is generally what the trend is. So, okay, maybe can we reassess? How can we use this data to make our organizations a bit more resilient, because we're going to have to face all of these changes that we can't predict. So maybe that's a good framing of it. So
I think the thing that I would just add is I think this one stability is that it's always changing. And I think every time there's that need where everyone is like, are we gonna be remote forever? Because I want to be able to plan my life and I want to go buy a house and make a financial decision. And I have a good friend who did that because the company said, we are going to be remote forever. Well, guess what? Now they're back in the office because saying forever, I think, addresses the concern and the need for stability, which I think many people want so that they can make decisions. But I think what we're really addressing is someone wants to figure out, how am I going to survive inside the current world that I'm living right now? And I think I know for myself, being a speaker who was living in South America at the time when the pandemic happened, wait, how am I going to survive this? How am I going to pivot? How am I going to do this? And what I needed to know is, if I've got no money coming in, how am I going to take care of my family? How am I going to live? How am I going to do this? And when that need is not met, it's hard to focus on anything else. Because I think uncertainty makes movies exciting, but it's what makes life exhausting. And so I think that reminder that it's always shifting, and understanding where each one of our people are at in their journey and their motivator right now, right? And their motivator 6 months from now and 6 years from now is constantly changing. And that's the big thing I saw looking at the report.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, and this is kind of just a theory. Like, I don't have the academic total research to back it up, nor the data, but I think like if you look at it in like a Maslow's hierarchy kind of pyramid, right? So I think many people are still in the lower to the mid stage. Like, okay, I need that financial stability. I need the basic respect that I'm doing something meaningful, the purpose kind of within that, and maybe some of the other motivators. Okay, whether it's altruism or rationality or autonomy, those are a bit more kind of higher maybe in the needs. Again, this is a concept I'm shooting from the hip a little bit from now in terms of the kind of self-awareness or expression part of it, or uh, could be a way to look at it too.
Yeah. And I think that with that in mind, stability, what does that mean for us? I think it's time for us to catch up as organizations. So if those kind of base level needs are not being met, let's address those. Let's entertain those so that we can progress and we can lay a strong foundation for what the future of work looks like.
Yeah. Casey, when you were coming on to build on what Kristen just shared right there, and I'm gonna just there's I think it was on under financial on your screen is like looking at Gen Z versus millennial, Gen X and baby boomers, how important need to have was financial. And I was just looking at that and I'm thinking if I was Gen Z or that age range right now, of course, finances are important, but maybe I still have a relationship with my family. And if my family has money, then maybe I feel like I can take risks. Because if my family doesn't have money, then I need that financial resources. My niece, who's 22 years old, is trying to figure out how to pay a $1,600 a month rent, which is splitting an apartment in Portland, Maine right now, making $20 an hour. That's huge. And without financial support, she can't do that in her job. And then I think of, millennials, which are maybe starting to have kids now, maybe looking at buying a house and why that financial need goes up, thinking about where we're at. And Gen X, it's like, yeah, well, I'm at my, I think they say, what is you hit your biggest earning potential, like 45 to 55. And so when you're there, you're like, no, finances aren't very important because look at why do they need money? Because we're good. And then think about it, baby boomers are starting to retire. And if they've got money, they're not thinking about it. It's more so, hey, am I going to make enough off of my investments? But if they're not the people, and Kristen, I think what you were just sharing is, are we taking time to understand where each one of our people are at? Because there's the assumption that they're where we are. And then there's also, I think, the assumption that depending on what phase they're at, they have certain needs. And I feel like that's one of my things of like, hey, these are some things we can use to guide our conversation, but I still need to ask where you're at and what your goals are right now to understand why this is a motivator to you right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you just nailed it pretty much right there. Like, this data is kind of the trigger to look, more deeply, that it can get to your blind spot. So I'm Gen X, or maybe, a higher part of the Gen X side of things. And, but if you looked at the baby boomers versus millennials on the graph, like, baby boomers are almost twice as much less need for financial needs than the millennials, right? And I think, what happens to us just as humans is we get blind spots. Like, we can only see the world from like our needs and our values and our motivations. So, if you're millennials and you came out onto the workforce after the Lehman shock and the financial crisis at that time, and you entered a difficult market and you've always been struggling with that market, and you're probably getting into the years where you're buying a house and doing all of these things. So, it's prompting that conversation, or hey, there is a real human story. And basically what these motivators are is they're real deep emotions that are imprinted on people's psyche, that are driving these needs type of thing. And I think this data and these gaps are what should prompt those conversations and try to get to the heart of those stories so we can understand the individual.
Casey, can I ask you a question?
Of course.
Do you notice in your research patterns and motivational changes as people age or go through different stages in their life? Are there things that you started to notice or see in your research?
Yeah, like as we're talking about the life stages, as you're getting higher, like, social relationships will drop, as you get older. You've already got your kind of core group type of thing. As we're seeing, like with Gen Z, they're getting into the workplace. They want to build their network. They want to build their connections. They want to have that relatedness in the work. So social relationships are very high. So definitely life stage plays a role. And, I think what we're seeing with this big data is backing up a lot of what we've heard in, the media about what is actually happening through the different life stages. But the interesting part is everybody's an individual. So like at the big level, like, okay, here's what Gen Z, this is what they need in the workplace. They want to work in person. They want to build those relationships. They want to get that hands-on mentoring type of situation. But if you break it down to just a random Gen Z person, they're just as statistically likely to be the same as a baby boomer, right? So it's big data like shows you this, but individually, it could be a little bit all over the place.
Fascinating.
Super fascinating. I love how we've taken off in this discussion already. And one of the other top motivators that also showed up that I was hoping to unpack with the group was also status and what that means for different people. And one thing, Kristin, you and I even talked about ahead of time was like, what does this actually mean? Does this actually always follow being defined as like a job title within the organization? So, Kristin, can you maybe share some thoughts on that piece of the status motivator, and are there different meanings behind that that you're seeing in your role?
Yeah, definitely. I think, at the root of it, status is about an achievement that makes you feel good, that satisfies you in some way. And traditionally, I think it was about, yeah, job title. It was about financial gain, about getting that plaque for recognition. But I feel like increasingly in organizations that are flat, where compensation, elevated job titles may not be as readily available as they had been in the past. Status does start to mean different things for different people. Maybe it's the status of having a flexible work situation so you can get to that fitness class that you want, or maybe it's about becoming a subject matter expert cross-functionally across your organization that is consulted when bigger projects are happening. I think organizations need to start understanding the balance between offering traditional status, but also respecting alternative status options that drive motivation and drive that performance. So for me, this is where we talk about employee engagement all the time, but employee engagement can't happen if workplace experience is not considered. So this is kind of like a root cause for me. Like if we start to think about the experience of working as it relates to status, that could have massive implications on engagement.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's like really getting to the core. And I think back to what Chrissy, you were even talking about is like at the macro level, you can maybe find some of these themes with status, but as you actually start to kind of take individuals directly for, and ask them themselves, status will have many different meanings, right? Is it being the subject matter expert? Is it, you know what? No, I do want that job title and that promotion. Yeah. Casey, Chris, anything to add on this?
Oh, I'd love to just, Kristen, as you were sharing that, I think one of the most eye-opening situations, actually two recently, is one, somebody I was working with was at a large credit card company. We won't say a name, but anyway, was working there and was just on the road nonstop. Was a senior project manager on the road, on the road, on the road, on the road, nonstop, did very well, was very successful. And then moved over to another company in San Francisco because it was 1 block from their house and they wanted a job where they weren't going to travel. Got there, killed it in the first 3 months, and then the boss promoted them into a job where they'd go on the roll because the boss thought, hey, you want to move up, where what the person wanted was stability right there. And I think this comes back to understanding where people are on their career journey and not necessarily, and I say career journey, or maybe life journey is the better one. I don't love the term life journey, but it's like, hey, we're all on a journey, and where we are and what we want at that point changes, right? Like Zech, you and I were just talking about being on the road all the time. And I'm like, I would love a month where I'm not on the road right now, right? And I love traveling for my work, but I think it's understanding. It's like, hey, is this something you'd want right now, instead of assuming that this is what you want because that's what status looks like for me, opposed to what does status look like for you right now based on where you are in your life and what matters to you at work and at home. I think is the question that we need to ask before we have people jump into assuming somebody wants that title increase.
I would say absolutely, and what fantastic, fellow panelists I've got right here. Like Christine, what you said, like you said about respect, and like as we see this applied, with our customers and in organization, when people are talking about status, when you start to have those deeper conversation, a lot of it comes down to respect, and it can be just the quieter side of status, the quieter respect that I need, rather than the loud, title about it. And Christopher, what you just mentioned as well, and I think this is a big problem as humans and managers and leaders. We just don't have the time to think, and we're assuming, right? And when
Mm,
you assume, it makes an ass of,
yeah.
okay, um, right? And like it's usually okay. This person wants the promotion. This person's killing it. They're doing so well, so I should give them the promotion. I should give them that extra job title. Or I spent so much of my life when I was early in like a younger sales leader, like thinking of the new coolest incentive that I could get to hit these financial needs, and it was a total waste of time because okay, there's this certain cohort that I kept hitting with it, but then there's totally other people that are motivated by different things. So really getting to the heart of it, and then understanding that our team has these different needs. And I think Kristen, going to the point of it, like for engagement, like increasing, if you can understand somebody's motivations, the individual's motivations, and give that feeling like understanding, especially when they're different than yourself. Like for me, I've got like 2% status needs. Like it's really low. Like I'm a startup founder. Like I'm used to getting, crapped on a little bit. Like, sorry. But, and I'll do whatever needs to be done. My first job was working as a trash man, like that was my first job going in the market. So I really don't mind, that type of thing. But as I'm working with people with higher needs of status, like I just have such a blind spot, and I need to really consciously understand this and kind of just get out of my, you know, what is it, like muscle memory of how to like act as a manager. And then I can make them, okay, quiet, just don't react like this, give them a little bit more respect and understanding, and have this objectivity. And then what we see is engagement scores go up, 3 months later or 6 months later, because I'm just taking a breath to understand what they need.
It,
Yeah, and yeah, oh,
go,
sorry.
go ahead, Kristen. Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, no, I think, this idea of status also, if we can tap into an element of status personalization, I think this contributes a lot to security, which is one of those top 5 motivators in the report. And I do believe that most organizations can find the balance between consistency and standardization and some allowance for that personalization around status, et cetera.
Yeah. I would, on that, when you were saying, Casey, what I was thinking is what your data, I think, allows people to do is I think it reminds folks that you can waste a lot of money at guessing, right? And it's what I realize is a lot of times I do a lot of stuff on rewards and recognition and helping people decouple rewards and awards from recognition because we often make that mistake, but people always fall back on the rewards and awards because it's easier to do that. And there's a process and agreement. So we avoid the discomfort of asking and having a conversation that may be uncertain on how someone's going to respond. And so we don't have that conversation. But when we don't have that conversation, we waste a lot of money. I was speaking at a wellness summit at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and we watched this really cool moment happen. And we were asking, what's a mistake you made that you learned from when it came to supporting employees? And one person said, we were trying to support all our nurses and all the rest, and we organized all these yoga classes and all these other things, and then we realized nobody wanted any of that. What they really wanted was control over their schedule so they could go home at the end of the day, and so they could pick their kid up, and that didn't cost anything. But we spent all this money, and I watched a bank in Lebanon. They dropped like, I don't know, it was like $200,000 to increase people's lunch benefit by $1. Nobody even knew that they did it. It was just a waste of money, opposed to asking what people actually cared about. But it takes a little bit more emotional vulnerability to ask a question where the answer may not be certain. And I feel like that's the piece where we do that. And if we use this data to say, hey, here's what I think that people want, what matters to you right now? And then by asking that, we have the data to be able to support, and then remembering that the answer to that question may change every 6 months or 6 days.
I think you're absolutely right. And, not only is it a waste of money, but it's a waste of time, it's a waste of energy. And you've given two great examples, one with, the nurses, I believe, and the other one about somebody getting promoted and having to travel again. And like, they might just leave, like, and then you've lost all kinds of stuff, like
They
not only
did.
money, right? Right. And what we found, like, as this gets more practical, is like, okay, I understand that we need to personalize, and I understand you're a little bit different, but I think there's this huge fear of, I don't know what to ask or how to ask, or is this going to be too blunt, or what's going to come back, and just prevents it. And this is kind of one of the things that we're starting to use AI a little bit more, is those, when you don't have that question, that right question to ask, here are some prompts that you can ask. Here's some, based on these gaps, why don't you ask this? Or why don't you
Yeah.
listen for this type of thing, like that? So, and that's, I think, the real challenge, is how to get people to be vulnerable, like to
Mm,
have those conversations.
mm.
That was a big conversation for us, Kristen, yesterday about the simple but not easy truths of leadership, right? Like, we know we should be asking these questions. We know we should be giving more consistent feedback and having difficult dialogues with our people. And you can see basically even on the middle of the report, like that's a huge motivator. Like that's right in near the top five. So how do we enable people to be more comfortable to lean into those conversations? And yeah, maybe we can talk through some actual tactical strategies now. I'd love to, like, maybe, start to kind of go through what are some of the actions and things we can do to bring this to life. And Kristen, can I pass it to you, especially on the L&D side?
Yeah.
What are some of the ways that we can maybe enable or work with our leaders to ask these questions and be more vulnerable, or, practice more feedback and things like that?
Yeah, I think, first off, it starts with empathy. I think there's, a tremendous amount of room for growth around emotional intelligence in business. When you can see where someone's at that's not like yourself, and be able to, not necessarily agree, but understand it, that's when you can start to have those more human, natural conversations and not have to wait till performance review time or revert to guessing. So I think, when we're looking at how we're developing our leaders, especially our senior leaders who are setting vision and setting the direction of the organization, it's about finding the balance between tactical skills as well as those essential human centered people first skills. I think, that when someone can practice empathy well, that leads to compassion, which is this idea of, like, empathy plus action is compassion. So not just, seeing where someone's at, but doing something about it. That's where I think the synergy starts. I think other practical things are too is that it's about mindset shifts. People are just as intimidated to have these conversations about what motivates others as they are about giving feedback around performance. And at the end of the day, it's all about our mindset shift. When we seek to understand, when we share feedback, knowing that it's our perspective and people can take it or leave it, they can do with it what they will. That's when we start to see a shift in, like, leadership protocol to, like, leadership in action with a people first mindset. So, a very general answer, but I think really practical tips make feedback a part of your everyday culture for sure.
Yeah, I can't agree more. And I think that one of the ways we make that happen is we need to get our senior leaders to ask for feedback themselves. Because I think what senior leaders make time for sends messages to others of what we value. And when we can get a couple key leaders to ask for feedback from their leaders, then that tends to get replicated, because when someone has a positive experience with it, they're like, oh, that wasn't so hard. And I also feel like there's I always use the analogy of, like, nobody goes out and buys a plant with the intention of killing it. But I think we unintentionally neglect it because we get going so fast. And I think that's what happens specifically with our best employees, is leaders tend to think they're set. I don't need to do anything because we're spinning so many plates at the same time. And I think what you were saying is, like, trying to bake it into the routine whether it's that regular one-on-one, right, which we have it on the calendar, but the problem is then it gets canceled and we forget to put it back on. But then making those one-on-ones easy by just giving people like, hey, here are 3 questions we're going to use each time. And then one of my just kind of really tactical things is that we often don't know where people are at. And specifically when we're meeting remotely, I think it's hard to understand because we get in and we have no clue what's going on in people's worlds. And so we just kind of hop in and be like, hey, how are you doing? I'm good. You? Good. Okay, great. And the timer's ticking down. So we don't want to ask that question at the end. So I think creating those spaces. So one of my favorite things to in my work at show people do is use pulse check questions. Like if I was to ask right now in the chat, on a scale of 1 to 10, what's your energy level today? So go ahead and put it into the chat right now. And everybody can put their answer in. And then you put in the answers and then 6, 7, 10, 10, 10, 10, 5, 4, 3, 3, whatever it is. And then you see people's response because it's easier to answer on a pain scale and then ask people to explain out, hey, why did you pick the number you did? And is there anything you or I could do to be able to bring that number up? And so I think that gives us a place because it's hard to explain where we're at. And I think many times we need to help give people tools to make that mental transition from the busy, I'm so stressed out to I need to slow down and have a conversation. And I feel like the last thing I'll say on this, because now maybe I'm starting to ramble here, is this, I think we need to, throughout human history, I feel like if you look at history, and I know a new pope was just selected for anyone who didn't just see it, just happened in the news right now, like every faith in one way or another has some sort of daily or weekly ritual. And if you look at just humanity, we commit to treating people with empathy and kindness, and then we walk out into the world, we get busy, we get frustrated, we get angry. And I think we as L&D people, as leaders, as speakers, as software companies, as everything, our job is to remind people of the common sense things that they already need to do. We just have to keep on nudging it and putting them in front of them in a different way every single time.
It reminds me of even before this, Chris, you and I were talking about the design of almost
Yeah.
nudges and micro experiences into our people's work
Yeah.
and enabling them with the tools or, the guide or the questions they should be
Yeah.
asking to have these conversations. And these are not, hey, attend a 1 hour training on how to motivate your people. This is, hey, spend 10 minutes having this conversation with one of your people in your daily check-in, and you're gonna get the momentum you need with motivating your people by doing this, like this small experience, right? So I think that's a big thing too, is like I think sometimes part of leaders get very intimidated by this whole like, okay, engage in these things because they're like, well, I don't know how I'm going to handle the conversation afterwards or what to do with it or
Mhm.
about if I can't do anything about it. So how can we take the pressure off of that and just make it these like small bite-sized experiences that they can execute in their daily conversations?
I'm just going to throw this out just because a friend of mine worked at Fidelity, and I remember him telling me, he's like, at one point, they auto-scheduled conversations with all of our leaders. And it was on the calendar, and they gave us 5 questions. And he's like, I looked at it, and this guy's your kind of like old Marine, doesn't want to get into these conversations. And he's like, honestly, I thought it was going to suck, but it was really good, and it was really helpful because it's just kind of like forcing you to have it. And I think we forget that, I ran a retreat last Monday for a senior team that didn't want to talk. And I interviewed everyone before and nobody wanted to come. Everyone was happy after we had it. And I feel like we forget we kind of got to push people out of the discomfort, have them show up, give them a structure, maybe create the container. And then, I don't know, Kristin, I'd love to hear your experience. It's kind of like you're putting them there, but don't just show them like, here's some theory, like go have this conversation, here's a script, have it now. Because after 5 times of having it, they're like, oh, that wasn't so bad. And then they keep on going, and then they get busy, and then they stop, and then we nudge it back out again and say, oh, that wasn't so bad. And then we keep on reminding them, and over time, they're like, oh, maybe I need to have this conversation on my own.
Yeah, definitely. We bake this feedback culture into kind of a lot of different areas that we work. And we also set the expectation that it doesn't have to be top down. I think as leaders, we feel like we have to have all the answers and we have to drive things. Our responsibility is to show up and start the conversations. we are all working with adults and people meet us halfway. So a great example of that is, traditional feedback is, the boss telling someone what they did right or wrong, and we move on with our day. What we're trying to do right now is create self feedback with a little bit of guidance from leaders. So leaders bring people together. Maybe it's a post-mortem after a project, or, in a meeting space or in a regular team touch base, and start the conversation that facilitates feedback. What went well? What did you do well? What would you do differently next time? And have people start to engage in a conversation and a dialogue. So the leader is responsible for asking those two questions, but the dialogue comes from the partnership and the relationship. And that's not only an accelerator of high performance, it's the quickest way to drive high performance, but it also helps people to feel comfortable building trust, rapport, respect, psychological safety with each other through open, honest, casual, not super formal dialogue. And that's one of the ways that we are looking to leverage feedback, especially with our early careers leaders, to be able to accelerate performance without having to wait for a huge training program or for an annual performance review, which totally, if you're doing it that way, you're just slowing down your ability to succeed.
Yeah.
So Casey, I have a question that actually came in the Q&A that I'd love to maybe point towards you and then open it up to the group. But this is a very common scenario we've all heard in the past. And Nina, I appreciate you asking this. What about when you ask about people's motivations, such as, let's say they want flexibility, but it's not something you can offer, right? Like, let's say we're in a blue collar manufacturing environment, there's shift schedules, it's not much flexibility we can have maybe in certain elements of it. So, what do we do in those scenarios? Like when you ask, but you can't give them what they need. And sometimes maybe that's even like a demotivator. And I think that's sometimes the biggest concern from leadership teams is like, well, if we ask and we can't do anything about it, what now do we do? So should we just not ask at all then? Right. So yeah, any thoughts around like that scenario one on how do you maybe talk to those executive teams that are scared to ask because they're not sure they're going to be able to fulfill it? But then let's say we do find ourselves in those scenarios where flexibility is at the top and it's not really in our organizational structure to be able to provide that.
Yeah, I think this was great, and this kind of resonates with everything that has just been talked about. But it's, I think this is like, I know I've hesitated personally, like with conversations like this. I kind of feel like there's uncomfortableness in team members, but I kind of intuit what they want, but I don't quite. There's been times in the past where I don't get into the conversation because I know I can't deliver it to it. In I think when I have my more mature days and I'm doing better as a leader and better as a manager, it's just about listening, right? And even if you can't deliver or give them, it's like if you understand, and I think like understanding is a real gift, and especially like in a workplace, and as Kristin said, where we're adults and people want to be treated as adults, say like, yeah, I understand that you can't make it more flexible with the contractual situations. And Nina's question is fantastic, but I understand it. Like, I understand that's what you're looking for. I don't know where I can help you out with this, to make it more flexible, but it's on my mind. I'll keep thinking about it. If I have a chance to advocate for you, I'll advocate for you. Probably keep your expectations low. Like, I can't, promise everything, but I understand. And I think that person will have been heard and they'll walk away and do this. But how do you get your managers at scale to do this? And I think this is kind of the big question. And of course, I'm coming through like a software lens, but where people learn is in a stretch assignment. Like if I get somehow thrown into this conversation and I somehow survived, I can probably, and I get a good response, I can probably do it again the second one. Where people are stretched, they tend to learn. Or, we've talked about leaders, modeling the behavior that we want, right? About feedback. If you have the leaders talk about giving feedback and do that. So if you have other peers that are doing this where we can learn from this, and I think this is kind of one of the drawbacks from like remote work as well. And, okay, I'm getting older and like going back in person, but it's easier to do these conversations in person And especially for me in a walking scenario, like where as you're doing it like online, it becomes you're looking at each other's eyes. You can't really look away when we're on a screen like this type of thing. And it's confrontational and you know, you feel this more. But if we're kind of sitting and we're not totally sitting at each other, but we're in this like mountain formation, like you remember when you drive a car, that's usually where you have your deeper conversations, or you're walking with somebody in a park for a while, you have your deeper conversations. So if you can have that type of just physical setup where you're not quite looking at the person, but you're like directionally there, then you don't feel as challenged and you don't get this flight or fight response where I just have to say something immediately and you tend to choose the wrong thing. But if you have that moment, okay, I'm not being confronted, I think our managers and leaders can do better if just that physical setup.
I love that. I mean, the use case of like the power of the environment in which these conversations are being done, right? And that was actually part of the reason we designed our leadership exchanges to happen over dinner and while we're eating food and like breaking bread together. Kind of takes away the pressure to be more vulnerable. So, Chris, any thoughts on that piece too? Yeah.
Kristin, you want to go?
I was just saying, as a completely remote employee with a team in London, I'm based in Chicago. I would say we've tried to reduce some of that, like, or create some of those environments remotely. Some ways we've done that is sometimes it does feel awkward eating in front of a screen, but when you're both doing it together, a little bit less awkward. So we'll set up um, like we call it spill the tea, where we just have like get your favorite beverage, sit somewhere that you're is not your normal desk space, like sit on the sofa, go outside, find a different environment to set up your laptop, and either have a tea or have a lunch together. And that's been one of the ways that even in a remote environment we've tried to reduce some of that tension and make it feel a little bit more like an organic relationship. And also the occasional like on team yoga class kind of helps to ease the tension as well.
I think I'm trying to bring back the retro phone call. I can't tell you how many times I've just asked clients, I'm
I
like,
love
hey,
this too.
I was like, do you want to just shift this to a phone call and go for a walk? Or you can do something around your house while you have the conversation, and then you remove the need for eye contact and you remove the need to try to keep yourself centered in the screen to look right. And it just removes one thing that your brain is focusing on. And it also gives people a little more vulnerability to be able to have emotions come out without feeling like you're being seen or recorded. And I think that also can help. One question I would add, Casey, to go back to the conversation you were asking about having those conversations is one I like to ask is I think many times people share their summary emotion first or their summary need first. And I think we need to ask, and one of my favorite ones was like, do you have more flexibility? And I think we always want to just go yes or no instead of asking the question, why is that something that's important to you right now? And many times by asking that question, we find out, because it's like people will always ask managers, like, is money's a motivator? And I'll go, no, it's just purpose. And it's like, no, that's not actually true. People wouldn't show up if they didn't get money, but no one's motivated by money. They're motivated by what money allows them to do. And so when you understand why they need the money, then you start to understand the motivation. So if you ask, I need flexibility, why is that important to you right now? Well, I'm just struggling. I'm always late every single day because I need to drop my kid off at the bus at this time. And then I can't get in because the traffic picks up by this and I don't have somebody else because my spouse is on the road or I'm solo or whatever it is, or I am taking a college class right now. And many times we do have the ability to be flexible in those scenarios. We don't have the ability to say, hey, your flight crew, no, we're going to let you come home early. No, because the job requires that. And I think the other thing that I see organizations do is they lie in the interview process because they're so desperate to get people into positions. I work with a lot of nonprofits in social work, and they're not necessarily honest about the schedule up front because they want to get people in the job. And then they get in and people are surprised. And so I feel like we've got to be honest. This is what this looks like. Does this work for your schedule right now? And are you going to be able to make this because these are the requirements coming in? People may not like that, but they need to know that. And then also when someone says, hey, I can't do this, well, we may need to start looking at other options for you, because that's actually showing we care. And the last thing on that is that when we have unflexible jobs, or only with tenure do you get to choose your shift, here's what it's going to take to be able to get you into one of those other positions. Here's some creative things that people have done in the past, and if it's not a fit, let's look at what you need to start working towards to be able to get into a job that is going to allow you to be able to do that, right? If that's a non-negotiable right now. And I think those honest conversations that we avoid, because it's uncomfortable, are the ones that often get us into the situations where we're struggling the most.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, back to even your response at the beginning, Casey, of like, most of it is just rooted in listening and having the conversation, right? It's not always, can we solve it directly in this moment, but are we willing to engage in the dialogue, hold space, and listen and empathize to understand these motivators? And then, yeah, I really like that. How do we pry deeper? Like, how do we ask, the 5 whys behind it to really understand what is at the root of this motivation that maybe we can actually work around? And then it kind of comes home with all of it with transparency, right? Like, how can we still, it's not necessarily like a motivation, like I'm motivated by people who are transparent with me, but it's something we expect. And it's like we become more engaged and connected to the things that are transparent with us. So it's like, okay, if you can't offer the ultimate flexibility, can you just be transparent and honest with why? And can we create a shared understanding of that why, of like the decision behind it? So I love kind of how we brought that home there. And we have a couple minutes, we have about 9 minutes left here. I do want to maybe touch on like a little bit of the Gen Z stuff. We didn't really get too deep into it. We touched onto it at the beginning. And Quinn asked also a wonderful question that I'd love to kick this off with. And then maybe we can just talk about how Gen Z's motivators are kind of going to impact our future engagement strategies as they make their way into the workforce more and more. But Quinn has this great question, and I would probably say this is maybe a challenge with anyone that's young in their life, but works with a ton of organizations in Indonesia. Motivation is an interesting topic. For the past 2 years, they're sensing a trend where even the most active youths in the organization struggle to put a name towards their motivators. Like, they aren't even clear what motivates them, right? And they're not able to maybe describe or articulate it. So I wanted to maybe, yeah, Casey, start with you. Like, is that a common trend or pattern with Gen Z or younger that you've maybe seen? And is that something you've seen? And how do we navigate that when people maybe don't understand their motivators?
Yeah, this kind of goes to the origin story of why I wanted to build Attune. Is like, I think most, not even only young people, but even, people in their journeys, sorry to use that word, Christopher, 30,
No,
40,
I think
50
it's a good
years.
word. I just said the way I was journey. Yeah, yeah.
The life journey. I guess, sorry, Zach, to take it a little bit of a tangent, but what's really interesting for me, and I guess quite meaningful sometimes, is when we're working with our customers and we hear like manager feedback or team member feedback, and they're in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and they're like, oh, wow, I didn't realize, like, I knew these motivators, but this one, I didn't really know it. But that's why I hated my last boss, and I just couldn't get it. Like, when I hear those stories, I'm like, okay, we're creating something meaningful. But I think when you're just coming into the workforce and you're young, you just don't have the tools, right? And you don't have the shared language. So we don't have the foundational language to share it. And okay, maybe something that I say, I'm trying to say what you think I might want to hear, and trying to please their boss if they're there. But I think just self-awareness is so low. So I think that's the very start of it, is just let's get a little bit more self-awareness. This is based on rigorous kind of creation of an assessment to give you real data that you can use from there. And then it's a conversation to like, what do these specific kind of motivators mean for you?
Yeah, I think, we do a lot of values based work and motivations kind of based work with our early careers leaders, because exactly to your point, Casey, like, you can't, if you recognize something but you don't have a language for it, it's really hard to be able to work with it and to use it to your advantage, and let it drive your career. So those are my like top two recommendations is early on, do the work to help people understand their values and help people understand their motivations and how to recognize it. It's the same as the way, we all learned how to name emotions by experiencing it and then having someone teach us what that word was that was associated to that feeling. And it's the same, yeah, same idea. And Zach, thanks for posting all of that great work in the intrinsic motivation, because to me it's the quickest way, and it's what our Gen Z team members are asking us for. They're asking us for more guidance, they're asking us for more feedback. So what better way than to guide them in those early days on that type of work.
And I would say on top of that is I think we also need to work on having a lot more uncomfortable situations. Is I think that when I looked at the generational differences and I look at how easy it is to escape and not be face to face, to be able to, pull out a distraction in a second as soon as it's uncomfortable. And I think our ability to be able to build relationships right now and to be able to realize that our relationships get stronger the tougher the conversations we have. And I think there's been so much talk about vulnerability that I think it's also maybe in a way swung us so far over to avoiding discomfort. And I don't know if this is just kind of a read, but I feel like there's so much avoidance of discomfort right now in our conversations and relationships that it's easier to step out of discomfort than to go towards it. And it's the discomfort with our boss, with not getting what we want, sitting with something that's uncomfortable without being distracted, having difficult conversations, getting feedback to realize that we roll our eyes in every staff meeting. And why am I not getting promoted? To not getting what we want, I think is one of the greatest gifts to figure out what we really want and how to get there. And it's, I think, getting those mentors, getting people in conversations, pushing people to have the real conversations. I think learning from our motivators and understanding, hey, why did I have that visceral reaction when the boss told me that my presentation wasn't good, is actually how we grow, not saying that was really great, good job, you're excellent, when it wasn't. And I think that being able to give that feedback, and if you go to like radical candor, you need the praise, you need the criticism, and those both need to be there together to be able to establish that trusting relationship.
I guess as we start to bring this home, I'd love to maybe go around the table and hear some closing thoughts on like as we think of our audience, we have HR leaders, people leaders who are leading the charge on how to engage and motivate our people, right? What are some of maybe your closing thoughts, like words of wisdom or strategies you would encourage them to do? And I'll share the first one. I think one, ask the questions. I think that's the easy one. We've clearly pointed out today was like have the conversation, understand what motivates your people, encourage leaders to have the discussions with their people, maybe take the attuned, motivation assessment and help get some data behind it. So okay, we got that action out of the way. What would be maybe some of your closing recommendations for our group? And Chris, I'll go to you first.
Um, yes, slow down. I think that we get going so fast that it's easy to get stuck in the spin, and it's just carving out that time to slow down both for ourselves and then just kind of taking a list of the people on my team or the people that I work with on other teams and then just do a 1 to 5 ranking. When was the last time I had a conversation? 5 in the last week. 1, it's been a long time. And then just actively go out and check in just with that one question. Hey, what are you working on that I don't see? What matters to you most right now? And just check in with folks, take time to do that. And I think we can do that in 3 to 5 minutes with people without even realizing it. And that right there will help us know what's going on and then work on doing what we can to support them.
I love that. I want to expand that even for our audience. Like, think of your circle of influence, like your own
Yeah.
HR team or your own department. Like, just start having those conversations there. Like, I
Yeah.
think that would be an awesome start for some of you. All right, Kristin, what about you?
Okay, I'll play on the slow down piece. We've all gone through in the past few years transformational organizational change. And my question would be, look at your people. Have you taken them along on the ride with you? And are they as much of a part of that journey, and on the same page as those leaders who created that strategy in the first place?
Incredible. Thank you. All right, Casey, bring us home.
Yeah, I challenge all of us on the panel and everybody that is attending. Like, I'm sure we all have a hard conversation or a difficult conversation that we should be doing, and I think we should do it and do it today and ask somebody, the question and ask a question. And I'm an awkward person, so I've kind of gotten used to embracing my awkwardness. So like, just, okay, be ready for the discomfort, be ready for the awkwardness, and ask those follow-up questions. And like, I'm never the most articulate and don't usually find the right question. So it's, what do you mean by that? Like, whatever they give me back, what do you mean by that? And that gets kind of a way to get to those 5 whys. So
Yeah.
I challenge you all to prompt one of those conversations, and maybe do it by phone, do it by voice message. It doesn't have to be,
Yeah.
with these eyes facing each other.
I was gonna say, maybe like find your courage spot, right? Like maybe there's the couch that you move to when you're gonna have the difficult conversation, or your courage pillow. I remember when I first started putting myself on my comfort zone, I had this like sweater that I got from Peru that was made, it was like my courage. It was kind of like colorful. I was like, all right, I'm gonna put that on when I need to be courageous because it's kind of bold, right? So maybe find that for you all and have the conversations. Just start engaging in the dialogue and understand what motivates you, what it motivates your peers, the people around you, and you can really start to have that deep connection of impact towards what you're trying to do together. So let's give a huge virtual round of applause and appreciation for these amazing leaders for sharing their time and their wisdom with us. Thank you so much to the 3 of you. Thank you to everyone joining as well. It means a lot as my motivator on the social relationship side to see like a community come together and learn and try to develop themselves and arm themselves with more tools and support each other on these journeys means the world to me and keeps me extremely motivated to keep going. So thank you for showing up today.